End of day one. I hope everybody has had an excellent time so far. So what are we here for? For most people, our interest in serverless or cloud native or any of the related new cloud technologies is to develop faster and to go at bigger scale. And there's nothing wrong with that, or is there? So that's the question that I'm going to be asking us today. Is there anything wrong with that? Is that enough? Is that all we need to worry about when we're building applications? So when I talk about going faster, being at larger scale, what kind of things are we talking about? What kind of things are key to serverless? Well, flexible infrastructure. So this whole thing of reducing your CapEx risk by buying servers on demand. Now serverless is absolutely the epitome of that. Very, very low capital risk. You can just play, you can try, if you don't like it, you can give it back. So very low risk entry, very low barrier to entry, which is great. And the main advantage for that, really, more than anything else, it's not money, because I'm sure 10 years ago, we all thought the cloud was going to save us money. We certainly learned our lesson there. It does not save us any money. It costs an absolute fortune. But it means that we can go faster because we've de-risked decision-making, we can make those decisions much, much more quickly. So the next component of moving faster, whether it's serverless or whether it's cloud native, is to automate. So remove those pesky humans from the development process, get rid of handovers, make everything go a lot more quickly. So that is kind of step 2 in our going fast, embracing serverless. Step 3 is to embrace distributed systems. Systems where individual components are essentially decoupled from one another and also from other copies of themselves. So what that means is that you get the scale because they're decoupled from one another. You can run more copies to go bigger. You can scale horizontally. It's also more resilient because you can, if one fails, you can have another couple running and you've got time for the one that failed to be brought back up again. So you've got scaling systems, you've got more resilient systems, but that isn't my experience of why people are primarily embracing distributed systems at the moment, because we've been doing this kind of stuff. I can assure you, I've been involved in doing this kind of stuff for 25 years. In the old days, it was because we wanted the resilience and the scale. But these days, what people are mostly looking for from distributed systems is the ability to parallelize. So you can have a team working on an application over here, another team working on an application over there. They can both push those into production, and as long as their APIs are maintained, they don't have to even talk to one another. They can all work and push their code into production much, much, much more quickly. So it's all about speed. Modern use of distributed systems, primarily for most enterprises, about speed. Now, another key component of going faster in the cloud is encapsulation. Now, this you get is out of the box with serverless. Where functions are innately encapsulated. Obviously, if you were doing something like cloud native, you might be using containers, you might even be using VMs for your encapsulation. But for serverless, it is functions. Now, the extreme win of encapsulation is ability to automate, fundamentally. Can tie in potentially very well with development tools that let you automate the development process, automate the deployment process, and automate the management processes, the operational processes in production. So you get huge amounts of speed benefit because this is because this aids automation. And then finally, you get the extraordinary benefits of automatically orchestrating your systems in production. Now, you don't have to the nice thing about serverless is this is something you get for free. You don't have to install a complex tool like Kubernetes, for example. The orchestration is built into whether it's Lambda, whether it's a Google FAS platform or the Azure functions. The orchestration is built in. And this is, again, allows you to move much faster because it takes the weight off your ops team. In fact, you don't even need an ops team, which inevitably, I can assure you, I love ops teams, but without an ops team, you go a lot faster. So again, it's all about speed. It's all about speed. And then finally, this is, well, ideally not finally, ideally you did this first. You need to embrace a different organizational culture if you really want to go quickly. Because if you've streamlined all your systems, you've made them all go super fast, and you've reduced all the choke points, and you've reduced all the handovers, and you've got rid of all the bottlenecks, then the remaining bottleneck is sign-off within your business of decisions. If you have a kind of very command and control feudal setup in your organization and all the decisions have to go all the way to the top, then that will be what then slows you down. So really, companies, I think Skyscanner call this radical autonomy. The lower in the organization you can make deployment decisions, the faster you can go. The less sign-off you need, the faster you can go. So again, this is all about speed. And the interesting thing is, I double moved you there. The interesting thing about all of this is it's the same process, whether it's a cloud-native cloud migration and you're using containers, or whether you're using serverless. The principles are the same. That speed is about three things, really. It's about automation, it's about risk management, and it's about parallelization. Those are the things that make you go much faster. You have an enormous benefit in serverless over cloud native, for example, because achieving these things, I've just described 6 things which are, in a cloud native world, crazily difficult to do. Moving a legacy system into the cloud is crazily difficult. Automating all your processes is crazily difficult. Moving over to a distributed systems architecture from a really simple monolithic architecture is phenomenally tough. Containerizing is relatively easy, but an orchestrator like Kubernetes, crazily difficult to run and to operate. And rewriting your organizational culture from the top down, again, a phenomenally difficult enterprise. But in serverless, you actually have a lot of this stuff effectively done for you. To a certain extent, a lot of that is because serverless is often greenfield. You're often coming from nothing, so you have less risk already. So that's just generally easier. A lot of the complexities of a move to the cloud, a lot of the complexities are just done for you within the platform. So orchestration, you don't need to worry about that. Encapsulation, you don't need to worry about that. Distributed systems, well, serverless serverless functions are by definition individual components. So by definition, you get a kind of distributed systems architecture, particularly when you tie them in with the other parts of the cloud, like databases as a service, which are the natural thing for you to do, and certainly the sensible way to use serverless. So the sensible way for you to use serverless delivers an awful lot of these things for you, things that would be extremely difficult to do in the cloud-native world. So you already got to step up. But nonetheless, doing all of these things is still hard because it's still delivering software, and we know that delivering software is extraordinarily difficult. But the win of doing all of these things, whether you do it via serverless or whether you do it using cloud-native technologies and techniques, is a very, very fast way of getting ideas from somebody's head into production in front of users. The payoff is quite astonishing. We're talking about 2 to 3 orders of magnitude over the old world. I mean, it was not unusual for enterprises to spend 6 months thinking about something before it went into production. In fact, that was pretty much standard. Now, the same kind of enterprises, whether they're using cloud native or they're using serverless, can do it in 15 minutes. That is a 3 order of magnitude change. And that is an industrial revolution style change. And so it's really worth the extraordinary effort you've just put in to delivering this. Now, quite often, if I was giving a talk about how great serverless is or how great cloud native is, I'd just go, great, that's fantastic. We're all superheroes. It's like we've had a new superpower. We can move incredibly fast. Let's just move fast and break things. And to a certain extent, I will now leave this here and go on to a completely different subject. Let's talk about something utterly and completely different. Let's talk about something else that's been going on, other than going much faster and amazing progress in cloud native and amazing progress in serverless that's happened in 2018. Let's talk about something else which has been quite big news for tech in 2018. And that is ethical scandals. We've had an awful lot of, these days, every time I open up The Guardian, I seem to see a story telling some awful tale of the misbehavior of big tech, whether it's Facebook or Uber, Volkswagen and their emission scandals, cryptocurrency due to use the same amount of energy as Italy by the end of the year. It's an extraordinarily large amount of bad stuff going on, and it can sometimes feel like we work for a bad and nasty and unpleasant industry. But that seems odd, because I know developers. Obviously, I've been in the development industry, tech industry for 25 years, and I was a developer myself, still do occasionally. And as far as I'm aware, we're mostly pretty nice. Everybody I work with is quite thoughtful people. Generally, people are pretty thoughtful. We're intelligent, we're well educated. We're quite pleasant folk, really. So why on earth are we getting all this bad press? Where are all these ethical scandals coming from? Because fundamentally, they all require code to be deployed, and that code has to come from us. No code goes into production that doesn't go through us nice software engineers. So what's happening? Why is this going wrong? Am I wrong? Are we not as nice as I'd think? Well, it turns out I am not the only person asking this question. So back in March, Stack Overflow asked for the first time an ethical question in their Stack Overflow annual developers survey. And the first ethical question they ever asked was, would you, as an engineer, like to consider the ethical use of your code? And 80% of us said yes, we would like to consider how our code is used. We would like our code to be used ethically. 80%, so actually that matches my personal experience, which is quite nice. So given that, why is there a problem? Because we should be policing this because we're nice folk. But then Stack Overflow went on and asked a second question. And their second question was, okay, you want to write nice code, but if you were asked to write unethical code, would you? And 40% of the responders said yes. Or they said yes, or it depends, which to my mind means yes, but I'd feel a little bit bad about it. So that's a bit odd, isn't it? So that doesn't sound quite as nice as the first question. So then they went on to ask a third question, which hopefully will shine some light on this strange behaviour. The third question was, if you did write unethical code, would you feel personally responsible for it? And 80% of Stack Overflow developers said no. I wouldn't feel personally responsible for the unethical code that I designed, wrote, tested, deployed, and possibly managed in the field. I wouldn't feel responsible for that. So they said, well, would you consider to be responsible for it? Well, some of them said product managers. Well, maybe I could accept that. An awful lot of them said the board. I thought, well, the board. The thing is, the board are a very long way away from the code. The board really don't know what we're doing or really understand anything we do day to day. So can they really be held responsible? Or should they really be held responsible? Is it a good idea to make them ultimately responsible for our ethical behaviour? Quite a lot of the other people said the shareholders. I thought, well, the shareholders really couldn't be further away from you at your keyboard as you deploy code. They have, I mean, they probably don't even know they have shares in your company. Never mind what you're actually doing day to day or what your products do. So this is a bit of a worry, because this feels like a massive abdication of clear personal responsibility, which is a bit worrying, because I saw that and I thought, blimey, is that just us? Are techies just very bad at taking personal responsibility? That feels wrong. So I went and did a bit of investigation. And it turns out that, again, I am not the first person to ask that question of their industry. This question has been asked quite a lot over the years. In fact, it's a question that has been one of the most commonly asked questions in psychology for the past 70 years, has been this question. Why do people who are good do bad things? Why do people who are naturally ethical do things that are unethical? And it turns out that absolutely uniformly across basically all of humanity, most people would like to do good. Most people want to be ethical, and in a perfect circumstance, they will be. However, it's all context specific. They will be good if the situation is absolutely, there's no downside to being good. But if there's some tiny downside to being good, even just having to think about it, they will not be. They will behave unethically. So there's a company in London called the Mind Gym who did a kind of meta-analysis of the psychology research on this. And they came to they did this for the finance industry, because the finance industry was very interested in why there was so much bad behavior in their industry after the financial crash. So they did a whole lot of work about why are we so unethical? We seem nice, why are we so unethical? And they came to the conclusion that there are a couple of things that will make pretty much anybody behave unethically. If the people around you are behaving unethically, you will too. If you feel like you are in an unfair environment, then you won't bother to be fair. If you're in a rush, if you're having to make a decision in a hurry, you will quite often make an unethical decision. If it's a bit of a slippery slope, if you make one small decision and it doesn't seem that bad, and then you make another one and then make another one, then you can make horrendously unethical decisions as a result of that. And finally, if you're told to. If you're told to, or you feel you've been told to do something wrong, you usually do. And this is pretty shocking, isn't it? You should be shocked. I was shocked. This is saying that humans, yeah, we're pretty nice. Everything that you see around you when you interact with people in your industry and you think, everybody's pretty good, everybody's pretty cool. You're right, they are nice, but in a minorly tweaked context, everybody will behave unethically. But we can't allow that to happen. So what are we going to do about it? Now, it turns out that this, again, is a question that has been asked for a very long time. In fact, the first time it was asked seriously and seriously investigated was by a chap called Stanley Milgram, who was a psychologist who looked at this in the 1950s. And what kicked off his interest in this question was the Nuremberg trials. Because at the Nuremberg trials, he was shocked at how many people who seemed perfectly nice were quite happy to do awful stuff and didn't feel personally responsible for it. Orders are orders. He said, we're just told to do this, and then before we did it. And so his question was, is this just Germans? Or is there something that's more innate to humanity when it comes to following orders rather than following what we believe to be right? So Stanley Milgram invented probably the most famous experiment in all of psychology. It was a very simple experiment. He dressed somebody up in a lab coat with a clipboard, and he got two people into his lab. One person was our tester, the person being tested, and the other person was someone they also thought was being tested. The testee thought was being tested, but was actually a confederate, as was the chap with the clipboard. The idea was that the tester was supposed to deliver electric shocks to the other person that they thought was a perfectly innocent member of the public like themselves every time they did something, made some trivial mistake, like getting a spelling wrong. And Milgram thought that he was interested in how severe the electric shocks the testee would give to the person they also thought was an innocent member of the public. He thought, you know, he would see how much they would shock them. They weren't really shocking them, but they pretended to be shocked. And he thought, well, you know, I'd be interested to see how far the testee will take this. And it turned out that 65% of the testees, like you and me, who were experimented on by Stanley Milgram, were happy, or would not necessarily happy, but would deliver a shock that they believed to be fatal to a perfectly innocent person who merely got a spelling wrong. And Milgram was utterly shocked. In fact, the whole of the psychological community was utterly, utterly shocked by this. And it turned out to be extraordinarily reproducible. This result was reproduced in different countries, at different times, in different cultures. Often up to 80% of people would electrocute somebody else who they knew to be perfectly innocent. They would give them a fatal electric shock because they were instructed to do so. And this was called, psychologists call this obedience, that humans are obedient, is the name they give to this phenomenon. Now, about 10 years after this, there was another chap who said, well, we totally believe in obedience, but we're not entirely sure that it's only obedience. Maybe there were other factors that came into play, particularly during the Holocaust, the Nuremberg trial folk. Was it because they were following orders, or was it also because everybody else was doing it? So Solomon Asch set up a series of experiments, again, very famous experiments in psychology, to see how conforming humans are. Now, in his experiment, he set up something actually very like this. If I was doing it here, this is what I would do. I would have a question up on my board here where there was an absolutely obvious answer to the question. You couldn't possibly get it wrong. And he would test out, make sure that nobody got the question wrong. Then he would get one tester in, fill out the rest of the hall with stooges. And what he would say was, he would ask the people in the hall to answer the question. And everybody but the testee would answer wrongly. He would have primed them to say the wrong answer. And they would all put their hands up and say, it's that. He wanted to know what the testee would do. Faced with having to go against everybody else in the crowd, even though they clearly knew what the answer was, would they give the answer they knew to be correct, or would they give the answer that conformed with everybody else in the room? And 75% of people give the answer that conforms with everybody else in the room, even though they know that it's wrong. Humans are extremely conforming. And again, this result has been reproduced over and over and over again. Now, if you only ever read one book of psychology, I would strongly recommend you read Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. So Daniel Kahneman came in about 10 years after Asch. He was at his 60s, 70s. And he and his partner, Tversky, wanted to know a little bit about how humans made decisions. And they ran loads of experiments. And they discovered that, probably unsurprisingly, all animals, and humans among them, are very optimized to make quick decisions. Now, this makes perfect sense. If you're in the jungle and you're being chased by a tiger, you need to be able to make a decision in less than a second. And so humans are optimized to be able to make decisions. All animals are optimized to be able to make decisions in an incredibly short period of time. Because in the jungle, you have to make a decision quick. Now, that decision doesn't have to be a long-term decision. It doesn't have to take into account long-term consequences. It doesn't have to be ethical. It doesn't have to be scalable. It doesn't generally have to be a good idea in 5 minutes' time. But it has to keep you alive right now. And it has to be quick. So humans are designed to make those decisions. Now, we don't have to. In Thinking Fast and Slow, which I would strongly recommend you read because it's a very, very good book, he talks about the fact that actually slow decisions really aren't particularly slow. We're talking about a couple of minutes. We're talking about stepping back and thinking, oh, that was the first idea that popped into my head, but I won't act on that idea. I'm just going to be thinking about it. Think about it for a few more minutes more. You might argue that that is actually what makes humans human. Our ability to spend a couple of minutes thinking about a decision rather than less than a second thinking about a decision. But it requires effort for us to do that. It is very, very easy for us to make a snap decision. And it is, although it's not massively difficult for us to spend a couple of minutes thinking about something, if we are rushed, if we are feeling under pressure, then we won't. We will not make those snap decisions. Now, we will make those snap decisions. Now, the interesting thing is that those Stack Overflow developers were actually right. It turns out that those Stack Overflow developers, the answers they gave in the 2018 survey match extremely well with 50 years of psychological research on how people do behave when presented with ethical problems, ethical dilemmas, ethical decisions that they need to make. It turns out that those Stack Overflow developers were remarkably self-aware. Now, who'd have guessed that? I don't want to guess that, but they were remarkably self-aware. Humans would like to be good. Generally, we want to be good. We want to behave well. But we are obedient. We do not go against authority, or we can. All of these things we can do, but by default, we don't. We comply. We're obedient and we're compliant. We go along with whatever the rest of the group is doing. And finally, we make decisions we can very easily make decisions that are short-sighted, that are short-term, that don't take very many factors into account. We can easily act as if we are being chased by a tiger, when in fact that very rarely happens in the workplace. Did I just jump forward? No. But this is a real problem with what I was talking to you earlier about serverless or cloud native or any of our modern development techniques. They are a bit of an ethical triple whammy here. They're all about going fast. Back in the days, back in life 15 years ago, waterfall. Now, love it or hate it, in the world of waterfall, we had a hell of a lot of time to think about what we were doing. We had loads of time to think about the implications of everything we're doing. But in our new world, we're really aiming to go from idea to in front of a customer in 15 minutes. That gives us very little time for contemplation. And therefore, it is very easy for us to make snap decisions that we don't thoroughly think through. So speed is an ethical anti-pattern. Another ethical anti-pattern is small. Decoupled systems, where you're only doing a tiny little, maybe you're writing one function and you think, well, maybe this function is a bit dodgy, but I'm sure it'll fit well into the entire picture and everything will be fine. Everybody can write dodgy functions and no one will feel responsible. That is an innate part of being human, that we don't necessarily see the big picture. We very much focus on what we're doing, and we don't necessarily step back and think about what the overall implication is. And finally, with serverless or cloud native, the whole point is that we can scale what we do to absolutely massive sizes. Now, the whole Facebook issue, if it had just affected 300 kids in dorm rooms in Southern California, it would be, you know, we would probably never have heard about it. We wouldn't care about it, really. It would just be one of those things. But because it affected millions of people, because it could potentially affect billions of people, we rightly feel considerably more concerned about it. Because it's billions of people. Scale matters when it comes to ethical behaviour. If it affects a large proportion of the human race, then we really do need to worry about it. So we've got this ethical triple whammy when it comes to serverless, and we need to be extremely aware of it. So what are we going to do? Because, frankly, I'm not going to stand up on stage and say, don't go fast, don't scale, don't write these big systems, don't attempt to be successful, because that would be an utter waste of time. And I wouldn't even think it would be the right thing to do, because tech can be an amazing force for good. So what are we going to do? We're going to go fast, we're going to go small, we're going to scale. So do we just go for... Do we just join the 80% of Stack Overflow developers who said, well, really, I don't feel personally responsible? I am going to argue that we do not need to come to that conclusion. Although it seems from what I've said that this is an insuperable problem, it actually very much isn't. It's something that we can sort out with just a small change in mindset. Because what I've talked to you about obedience and conformity, it can work against us in certain circumstances, but in other circumstances, it can very much work for us. We just need to change the story. If, as developers, we believe that we are henchmen, possibly unwitting henchmen, but nonetheless henchmen, of an evil organization, we will make decisions that that are in line with that role that we have defined for ourselves. I had an interesting conversation recently with it's quite a senior developer, a very sensible chap at a company, and also the CEO. I said to both of them separately, if you were asked to do something unethical, would you? And the engineer said, well, I wouldn't have much choice, would I? My only choice in that circumstance would be to do it or to quit. And I wouldn't really want to quit because that would be a lot of effort, so I'd probably just do it. I thought, well, that's interesting because that's quite in line with the Stack Overflow results. So then I asked the CEO, who was also an ex-engineer, I said, if you were asked to do something unethical, what would you do? And he said, do you know, I never attribute to malice that which could be explained by incompetence. If somebody asked me to do something unethical, I'd assume it was a mistake, and I would speak up and say, actually, I don't think that's the right thing to do because it's unethical. Shouldn't we do something else instead? And I thought that's a very interesting difference. That the person who felt that they had more power assumed, correctly probably, that if they were asked to do something wrong, it was an error. Because actually, these days, I will argue that it's less attractive for businesses to behave unethically than it used to be. Now, if you can cheat, if you can behave unethically and get away with it, you've obviously got an advantage. And I can imagine that there were a lot of businesses in the past who felt, well, they really did want that advantage. But if you get caught, then it's not an advantage for you anymore. And I think in the modern world, you are vastly more likely to get caught. We are more naturally transparent. We are more likely, we're all blabbers. We're on Twitter every day. Things get out. And if things get out for a business and you've behaved unethically, it can be very bad for you. You might get bad press, like Facebook. You might have difficulty hiring, like I would imagine is the case at Uber. Or you might all go to prison, like at Volkswagen. So there is downside these days to businesses behaving unethically. If you're assuming that you work for an evil organization, you may well not Do not make that assumption. If you're asked to do something at work, say something. Speak up. Say, actually, is that a mistake? If you're asked to do something that you think is unethical, say something. You're probably actually not doing what is desired by your business. Thinking fast and slow, that's an easy one. That's an extremely easy one to get over. You just need a process. You need a process that stops people from moving forward without making any decision at all. You just need a little bit, and it doesn't have to slow things down that much, just a couple of minutes of reflection before you push something live. Just have an internal process for that. Thinking fast and slow is very, very beatable. You do not have to only take those jungle-style fast decisions. But I'm gonna reiterate something here. When I talked about, is your organization evil? It probably isn't as evil as you think it is, at least these days. History is rife with soldiers that followed orders that were never given. It is particularly important that you say something if you see something that you are unhappy with, because you may feel like you are following an order. You know, if your manager asks you to do something, assume incompetence, not malice. There is no reason to just do it without saying anything. We all need to challenge when we see something that we don't agree with. The interesting thing about setting ethics, an ethical culture at a company, is that again has been widely researched. And it doesn't come from the top. It doesn't come from CEOs, because when your CEO asks the company to behave ethically, then everybody thinks, yeah, they're just making that up. And they ignore it. When junior people want to change things, they don't really have the social cred to do it yet. They don't have enough power within an organization to make a difference, even if they're extraordinarily enthusiastic. They don't have that power. The people who change organizations are actually people in the middle. People who are close enough to the action to know what's going on, but have some social cred. People probably like all the people in this room. So more senior architects, people with a little bit of experience, junior managers, they are provenly the best people at changing a culture within an organization. So it starts here. Ethics is middle out. Think middle out ethics. Don't worry, the CEO is not going to fix this for you. The junior people just don't have the power to fix this for you. You start at the middle. People like yourselves. And one of the best things you can do, rather than, don't go home and write a code of ethics. They're lovely. It won't do you any harm, but it'll just go in a cupboard and it'll never be looked at again. They don't make any difference whatsoever. If you want to be ethical, the key to becoming ethical is to act like it. Is to choose something ethical to do, and then that actually convinces yourself and others that this is the way that you want to behave. And I've thought long and hard on this, along with, I don't know if Paul is in the, there we go, my compatriot in this. We thought long and hard on this. What is the most ethical thing that we can do in technology at the moment? That is easy, that's low-hanging fruit, that almost anybody in this room could raise, could discuss, could get rolling in their own organization. It's ethical hosting. So I'm sure you've heard the statistic that data centers now consume as much energy or produce as much carbon pollution as the entire aviation industry. And it doesn't have to be that way. There are simple things that we could do to make ourselves carbon neutral in terms of our hosting. And there's really absolutely no reason ethically why we shouldn't do that. Now, it's a very, very easy thing to do. If you're moving into the cloud, don't worry about it with you. I mean, you can move over, if you're running on-prem data centers, to be honest, you're not, are you? This is a serverless conference. You're thinking about moving into the cloud. In the cloud, there are various places to host that are 100% carbon neutral. You can host on Google, you can host on Azure, or we're very lucky in Western Europe because there are a handful of AWS regions worldwide that are 100% carbon neutral. One of them is Dublin, and one of them is Frankfurt. So if you put your instances in either of those locations, you will be instantly 100% carbon neutral. So any new instance, absolutely put them in one of those locations and tell people that that is what you're doing and why you're doing it. Now, I know with serverless, we're in a difficult position with serverless because serverless was only available in the massively dirty, appalling US East region until fairly recently. But it isn't anymore. So you can actually have your serverless instances in nice, clean, sustainable regions. I exhort you to think about doing that because it's an easy step, it's low-hanging fruit, it's clearly ethical, and it will get the ball rolling. It defines your culture and your attitude within your business and also within technology in general. We just need to make it should be socially unacceptable to be hosting our instances in dirty regions and running our servers off fossil fuels. We don't need to. So on that note, a clear action for you. Remember, if you're on Amazon, remember Dublin and Frankfurt and try and keep your instances there. And most importantly of all, tell your AWS contacts that this is what you're doing and that you do care, because AWS are entirely customer driven. If they think there's a desire for it, they will do it. If they think they will move. So at the moment, across their entire, across all their servers, they're about 50% carbon neutral. We want to get them to 100%. They've said they want to get to 100%, but they haven't set a date on it yet, and they don't feel that there's any particular urgency to do so. We want to start pushing them and providing them with some reason to believe that there is urgency. So clear action for you there. So thank you very much indeed for listening to me talk to you about ethics today. There are amazing things that we can do with technology, and we need to do them thoughtfully. Thank you very much indeed.